Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. I'm putting on my educator hat today because, well, we really need to talk about why traditional digital citizenship programs are failing our kids. We're diving into a fundamentally new approach to the social media crisis in our schools and our homes. If you've been feeling like the old rules just aren't cutting it anymore, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to explore how we can empower our students to actually reclaim their digital agency from Silicon Valley. Here's our roadmap for the workshop today. We'll start with the war for attention, move into why digital citizenship fails, then decode the mechanisms behind the screens. From there, we'll get into social media harm reduction, build some active defensive skills, and finally, talk about shifting school policy. All right, let's jump right in. Section 1. The war for attention. Look, we absolutely have to start by acknowledging the harsh reality here. This isn't a level playing field. It's an asymmetric war currently raging for students' focus, their time, and ultimately their mental health. This quote right here, it hits the nail on the head. We are actively losing this battle. Why? Because we're sending teenagers, whose developing brains are basically wired to crave dopamine and oxytocin, into a digital environment explicitly rigged to trap them. It's an architecture meticulously designed by Silicon Valley to completely bypass human willpower. Just think about that. To put this into perspective, let's look at the architectural shift. Remember back in 2006, when our biggest stress was reordering our top 8 friends? Back then, platforms were just chronological tools. You scrolled, saw your friends, and, this is key, the feed actually ended. Fast forward to today. Modern platforms have morphed into these continuous captivity machines. They use predictive algorithms and infinite scrolls to literally demand involuntary attention. They've bulldozed every natural stopping point, turning a quick 5-minute check-in into a 3-hour binge. Moving on to Section 2, why digital citizenship fails. So, knowing what we're up against, why do our standard wellness toolkits, those pretty screen time dashboards, and old-school digital citizenship programs fall so tragically short? Honestly, why are they basically obsolete? Well, when panic sets in, school boards and parents usually retreat to a really dangerous binary. On one side, we have institutional abstinence, rigid phone bans that just delay the inevitable without teaching any actual skills. On the other side, passive surrender, where we basically blame teens for a lack of willpower when their anxiety and screen time spike. Both of these approaches entirely ignore the core problem, the structural predatory manipulation built right into the platforms. All this pearl clutching assumes a fair fight. It assumes kids are interacting with static media, but they aren't. Our teens are standing alone against a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. You just can't fix an engineered environmental crisis with individual behavioral reprimands. It's impossible to outpace real-time adaptive algorithms that are specifically hunting for adolescent emotional vulnerabilities. Section 3, decoding the mechanisms. So to help students actually fight back and hijack these predictive models, we have to demystify the machine's architecture. We literally need to help them look beneath the screen. This brings us to the mechanism model. This identifies 7 core design variables engineered into these platforms. Think of these as the actual blueprints for the psychological traps our students face every single day. By teaching students to recognize these mechanisms, we hand the power right back to them. If you're an educator, a great group exercise is having your classroom visually map out this architecture on a whiteboard. Let's look at a couple of the biggest traps they'll find. First up, the slot machine effect. It's incredibly simple, but utterly devastating. It's basically a digital casino in their pockets. Try running an interactive simulation in class. Have students pull up their feeds and count how many swipes it takes to find something genuinely interesting. They will quickly realize that Silicon Valley spaces out rewards on a random, variable ratio. The thumb keeps swiping because that next video could be the dopamine jackpot. Explaining this to teens is a total game changer. Once they see they're the mark in a corporate casino, that compulsion suddenly looks like a cheap, calculated trick. And that trick runs on a continuous loop. Prompt, action, reward. A red badge flashes, the teen clicks, and boom, an artificial dopamine or oxytocin hit. Platforms leverage this to deliberately build up a dopamine tolerance in the adolescent brain. What does that mean? It means each dose becomes slightly less effective, so screen time naturally skyrockets just for them to maintain their baseline. It's wild. All right, Section 4, social media harm reduction. The million-dollar question is, how do we fight this? The answer lies in a framework called social media harm reduction, or SMHR.
To empower teen agency, we absolutely must ditch behavior-based blame. Relying on willpower, restriction, and shame just doesn't work. Instead, we have to pivot to structural platform awareness. When we help teens spot these psychological traps, they start building their own internal reflective strategies. We essentially upgrade them from passive victims to active, conscious navigators.
I love this analogy. Harm reduction accepts that a practice is inherently risky. Think about driving a car. We know it's risky, but we don't ban cars, right? We mandate seatbelts, engineer crumple zones, and we teach defensive driving. We need to do the exact same thing for the digital landscape. We need to actively equip our kids with robust psychological toolkits, real digital defensive driving.
Which brings us to Section 5, Building Active Defensive Skills. Let's walk through a 45-minute interactive workshop outline you can use. To kick things off, try 3 quick icebreaker activities to get them thinking. Have them map common platform traps together, compare their screen time stats, or just have them sit in silence for 3 minutes and track how many times their phones buzz. It's incredibly eye-opening.
After those icebreakers, move into your first breakout session, the sensory audit. Have them do this right there in class. It's the perfect template to directly counter that hardware weaponization we talked about. Have your students intentionally identify high-contrast triggers, reset their privacy settings, and actively disable toxic red badges and haptics. By systematically silencing that digital cacophony, they are setting hard boundaries against the attention capture machines.
The second collaborative activity is algorithmic inoculation. We want to rescue students from being passive victims stuck in volatile filter bubbles. Set up small group role-play scenarios to practice what's called feed crafting. This is where we literally teach students to sabotage the predictive models. They intentionally feed the algorithm boring, neutral, or highly erratic signals to break the feedback loop and reclaim their feed. And here is a fantastic daily defensive habit checklist you can hand out. It includes metric decoupling, which separates their self-worth from visible likes, exposing those likes as just cynical corporate scorecards. There's also inserting manual speed bumps to kill the infinite scroll, and practicing arousal awareness to dodge emotional landmines. As an educator, a great script for facilitating this group critique is simply asking the room, when was the last time a red notification badge made you feel anxious? Then, just step back and let them map these mechanics to their lived experiences. Finally, Section 6, Shifting School Policy Paradigms. Let's look at how all of this builds a fundamentally new leadership briefing and policy blueprint for our school boards. It's time for a policy audit. We need a framework that totally replaces outdated behavioral restrictions with measurable, structural platform literacy metrics. Instead of institutional phone bans, we should be doing platform architecture audits with the students. Instead of doling out screen time punishments, let's evaluate their algorithmic navigation skills. Shame and rigid rules just shut down communication, but structural literacy, that builds truly resilient digital citizens. So, I want you to take this final thought and this specific question right back to your leadership teams. Are your district programs auditing the platform architecture, or are they still focusing entirely on student behavior? Use this as a rubric. Let's stop blaming kids for drowning in an ocean that we allowed Silicon Valley to build. It's time we step up, teach them to see the water, and give them the actual skills to navigate the currents. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.